with Dr Euripides Altintzoglou. And I'm going to talk about the exhibition as it currently is and the manifestation we had previous to this week. So if you haven't seen the exhibition since Monday, it has changed. And yeah, they're going to talk about the wider project and the development of the project over a period of a couple of years. So I'm going to hand over to them.
Thank you. It's always odd talking to a mic.
Yeah.
You know, when I was growing up, I had visions of a Madonna set. You know, where it was used to turn out to MTV Awards from somewhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Hands-free. If only we had hands-free mics, we could do a little dance to you. Choreographed performance.
Can I just start by saying thank you and welcome for coming. I think the common mistake that people that know each other for a while used to do is to forget that the audience might not be as familiar with the work as we might be. So we spoke about presenting the project and in its development, saying a few words about how we met. As you might know, the project itself travelled throughout the UK. It was very giving, if I may say, in terms of its production, because it involved local photographers, involved local people in every community that it's been through. And when it came through Wolverhampton, the gallery got in touch and mentioned that Oliver Chanarin was coming by. My reply back was like, "Are you serious?" Because I've been a fan. And then we met. And the first time we met was with you, Oli, and Antonia, and we went for dinner. Yeah? Queen Street Cantonese. And it was amazing, and I've said this many times, but although I had a lot of questions to ask about the work, the project, the current project itself, you were genuinely interested in people, including myself. And one thing led to another, and we started, before we know it, we're brainstorming project titles. Yeah, project titles. It was obvious, I think, and I think it was Antonia, it's your fault. It was Antonia that noticed that we could talk forever about this project. And a few months down the line, the work was shown. Was it for the first time in Derby?
Yeah, that was the first version.
The first version that was shown in format, and as part of the catalogue, we decided to do an interview. That interview spoke mostly about the production of the work, the tensions that seem to underline contemporary portraiture, these kind of tensions between a desire to be seen, but also, I suppose, a kind of social anxiety of how we're being seen. We spoke about the pressures of being a contemporary photographer, working with analogue film, traveling up and down the UK, and my very genuine question was like, how do you find the strength to approach strangers on a daily basis? And how do you develop the skills to let them in, to let you in the world? So, I don't know if you want to add anything about the production of the work and the communities that you worked in, because I know you had some amazing stories about the people that you've met.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I think it's interesting that when we met with you, we were kind of brainstorming, well, what is this exhibition going to be called? We had one name, and we didn't know what to call it. And I think that says something about the work, actually, that it had this openness. We didn't really know what it was. And I think one of the reasons why I was asking you so many questions was I was very confused. I was very lost. I think with any work, you have this moment where it started, but you don't know what it is. And I think that I was kind of at that point when we met. And it started to take shape and crystallize. And even then, once it's in the gallery, as you've seen, even then it's still changing. So the work is like a kind of an attempt at something that we never quite really get to.
But you see, this is why I was very interested in this project, because it's not trying too much to be a very complete, a complete image, a complete collection of work. That it kind of stays in perpetual becoming,
Yeah.
and it keeps growing. And a lot of people, not just artists, have this pressure to finish things off fully, and I think it kind of this perpetual becoming or ongoing engagement with the world is evident in the prints themselves. You know, we spoke about this a lot. You know that you didn't select the finished, polished prints, but
no, I didn't. And look, I think that there is a kind of tendency to fetishize this idea of the attempt, the unfinished, it maybe is not doing what it's supposed to do, but it goes on a bit of a journey, and there's the language of that. But just to be really transparent, the fact that the machines that were, the robots that were being exhibited until last week have been taken down, I'm experiencing that as a failure. As much as I want to embrace a kind of attitude of openness to whatever the world presents, it feels painful. It really does. It feels like I had an idea, I tried to do something, and I failed. And there's lots of ways of kind of trying to speak about that and to see that there's not all failure, that it's also, that good things came out of it. I definitely learned a lot, and it was a real education. But I guess the biggest education was I actually took on something that was too big for me to do, and it was unrealistic, and it not working. It really hurts. It really hurts, and it feels like a failure. And I think in the course of my work as an artist, I've had lots of failures. I've had, making work is all about failure. But there's something about this failure that feels technical. I mean, it's not feels, it is technical. It's a technical failure. But it's also a failure of, it's a failure of recognizing what you can do and what you can't do, understanding your own limits. And that's the bit that hurts, So in a way, I just want to say that because I'm coming into this room with a feeling of being very proud of the work, but also feeling very sad about it, and feeling slightly ashamed, to be honest, that I've made something that had to be removed, put it back in its box and shipped home at enormous expense, personally, financially, etc. And that vulnerability, like there's so much vulnerability about making art, being an artist. Like you spoke about going out with the camera and encountering strangers, and that's terrifying, and then saying, can I take a picture? And then once you've taken the picture, worrying about how they're going to think about it, and knowing that they're going to be disappointed about it, because everyone always is. And with this particular project, we were working so directly with the real world, and that sounds weird, but it's a lot easier if you're making stuff up, if you're making work which is fictional, or you're working with actors, or you're collaborating with performers where there's a kind of understanding about what's going on. But working with people who are maybe part of the realm of the gallery or art world, or they don't necessarily understand or appreciate the kind of nuances of the way photographs work in the world and are distributed and valued. That was in itself very, very complicated and very difficult. So this project had all this complexity of working with the real world, working with people not as actors but as themselves, and all the risks that came with that. And that was already feeling very, very difficult. And then the technical side of the robotic installation, you've seen some videos here, you can see that it's a beautiful thing when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's a very depressing thing. So I'm kind of walking into this room with a lot of feelings, a lot of raw feelings of like, oh, this has been an amazing adventure, and I'm lucky to have had the adventure. But at the same time, I feel like, there's a lot of failure in it as well, and that's painful.
Well, the biggest irony about machines and technology is that, it's letting us down when we need it the most. The whole definition of a machine is it's supposed to do the same thing without failure, unlike humans. But as we spoke earlier, they have very limited capacity for failure, for tolerance.
They break.
They break the break. But maybe, and this brings us to a kind of bigger question that I have underlined. How has the dissemination of the work affected the continuation of the project? Because I think now the work, and correct me if I'm wrong, hasn't been shown for longer than it took to be made. It must have, or it's getting pretty much there. So you have almost like a balance, the amount of time that it took to produce and look how long for the work has been shown.
Well, when we came and brought the show here to Wolverhampton, we realised that we didn't have as many pictures from the area that we'd taken as we'd liked, and so we went back to the archive, went back to the negatives, and we started reprinting some of the pictures. Well, not reprinting, we printed more pictures that were local to Wolverhampton and inserted them into the show. So actually, the show is kind of, as we've moved around, we've added things to it, so it's grown, which is quite nice. And it's part of the kind of spirit of this thing, which is, it's very inclusive, it's very giving, it's very much about the exchange.
And when I saw the first time I saw the robots, it was when you were installing them.
Yeah.
Right? And the first impression that I got was that, and that was the first time I've experienced this in an exhibition, it was that suddenly we have to surrender to the work. When you walk into a gallery, you have full power, full control of how you're going to view the exhibition. You might be guided by some curatorial, tricks around the flow of the crowd, but nevertheless, you choose the order. You might skip, you might not see the whole thing, but when you walked into the room downstairs, you almost naturally drew yourself into the middle of the room. And you had to wait for the robot to show the work in a very specific sequence, almost like a mystical sequence, led by the algorithm. We'll talk about the algorithm. So that is really uncanny in terms of how we relate to archives that are supposed to be at our disposal. There are many power plays in archives. So suddenly, we're thinking about an algorithm that drives the robot, an algorithm that controls how we're going to view the work. And the work itself was not laid out all at once. That's something, again, very peculiar in an exhibition. That you had to wait until you had a sequential, almost cinematic take that kind of permeates the new hand. And yes, eventually, like the algorithms, on social media, they're not perfect. And so that kind of, I don't want to call it failure, yes, the machine stopped working. It wasn't failure. I think there's a deeper comment, there's a deeper meaning that can come out of this. And within that notion of controlling how the work is being seen.
Yeah. I like this thing that you've just mentioned about not seeing everything all at once, because you go into the room and in all the places that we've shown the work, I've had this feedback of actually frustration. Like, I want to see what's the pictures in the part. I want to see everything, but I can't see everything. And I think that was the kind of point of it, was that you were denied the view of the whole thing. You could only ever see a little bit of it. And I quite enjoyed that power play of like frustrating the viewer. But you speak about this algorithm, and one of the places that we showed the work before Wolverhampton, it was shown in Switzerland, and it was shown in a church. And it was amazing firstly just to put a robot in a church was amazing. In that context, it took on a whole. I always kind of imagine, I always like the idea of taking the language of a factory and putting it into an art gallery, where the gallery becomes kind of a factory. And the artworks become these kind of products in a way. And I thought that was quite an interesting comment on the space of the gallery. But when it was put in a church, that wasn't something I planned. And it took on a whole other thing. Because the algorithm, these robots were controlled by an algorithm. It wasn't random. And it was quite interesting. A lot of people ask me, well, what is the algorithm? And I always tried to resist answering that, because I just felt like a bit, maybe this is me being a little bit arrogant, but I thought, like, you don't ask a painter how a painting works. You don't look at a sculpture and you go, how does it work? You just look at it and you take what you want. So I always try to resist this thing of explaining, but because it's a machine, you want an explanation. But there was something else that you said that was the thing I really wanted to respond to, and I can't remember what it is now.
We're going to speak about the priest who came in.
Well, that's another thing, is that, yeah, in this church, the priest came and said, why do you put these robots in my church? What is going on here? And I said to him, well, it's an algorithm, and the algorithm is doing a job. We don't quite know what it is, we don't know what it's doing. It's something mysterious, and if you think about algorithms, they're very powerful. They recommend stuff to us in our lives. They operate in the background. It's like a kind of a hidden hand. And I was like, does that remind you of anything? And he's like, okay, all right, okay, I get your point. He said, give me an hour, and he went off, and he came back. Actually, there it is now. You can see on the altar, there's an enormous Bible. He brought this Bible, and he said, can I put the Bible on your show? This, he said, is my algorithm. And this is what is the algorithm that drives everything, all my beliefs. And I thought that was just such an interesting response.
Did you give him your Bible?
I didn't give him my Bible. I didn't tell him about that, because I thought he might get too upset. But there was something else that you said, but we'll come back to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. And then the work itself, now in its current iteration, I remember seeing in format, and it had a slight different layout. It was almost like in diagonal, it was ascending and descending. But what I really like downstairs now is that the sequence, again, it's very honest. It's not pretending that there's no sequence, it's not pretending that there's no rule. It's actually quite honest about it, quite hard about it. But what I've noticed in the layout, perhaps it's me overthinking algorithms and ratios, it's that within the sequence there are instances of dialogues, perhaps unintentional, but the way that the images are paired, they extend those dialogues that we have as people, we have as subjects and artists, or co-workers, colleagues, the dialogues between the subject, the human, and the place.
Okay, I remember what it was I wanted to say about the last thing, because you've just reminded me. You spoke about this feeling of passivity. Yeah, so you walk into the room and the machine, if you walk into the room now, you're in control, right? You walk around, you see the pictures, you choose to look at that, to look at that. You decide to create relationships with different images on the wall. That's your choice. You have there's an active role as a viewer. The machine undermined that. The machine, and I noticed this particularly in the exhibition in the church, because it was this corridor, that people would come into the space and they would notice the machine first. And they would go and they'd follow it, pick up a picture, put it on the wall, then it would go and get a picture off the wall, they would travel along the wall, they would go and put it down, and then they would turn to leave, and then they would see another one happening on the other side. So then they would get trapped into that, and they would watch it go to the sequence, and after a while they would get bored of that, and they would turn to leave, then they get trapped again as they go out by another thing, let's just watch this. And the machine somehow was controlling the movement of people in the space, just through their attention. And I think there's something very frightening about that. Just the way you saw crowds just moving and rotating around the space. And And when you go into a gallery, normally you're in a position of power as a viewer, and the machine underlined that. And I think that's the point of it, really.
That's exactly what I thought was the most important.
And now when you go into the space, like I haven't seen the space, because I didn't hang that show. It was hung by Chris and Antonia, who came up and did that. And it's really interesting that you look at these different relationships between different images and you go, there's a dialogue there. I think the human brain is just designed to do that. It's like you see two things and you want to try and create a narrative. We are story-making machines. Humans operate through stories.
Yeah, we'll add a story where even if there isn't one, we'll come up with a story.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to a lecture recently with the author of Sapiens, what's his name? Valderrama. He was saying that humans are storytelling machines. And if you look at the leaders, charismatic leaders, the Trumps of the world, these are storytellers. And they're so effective because they tell us stories. And the human brain just understands storytelling better than we understand numbers and anything else. So I think when we look at two pictures on the wall, you immediately start telling yourself a story about how they relate to each other. So I think that's just something that happens. And I wanted to, when I initially came up with this idea of a machine that created random and algorithmic juxtapositions, I wanted to exploit this human desire to make stories in the brain.
It comes back to this bigger question of control and power. I mean, the project itself came in the aftermath of very significant issues in Britain. Brexit, yes, COVID, the pandemic, and again, all these things relate around control and power. The recent immigration debate, again, control and power. And you can see, if you look at just the images themselves and how they relate with portraiture and the documentary tradition, they're supposed to empower people, like give them a way or a chance to have a say in who they are, how they see, how they define.
Because when I started, and you know this because we spoke about it at the beginning, but when I started, the original idea was to do something very objective. The portraiture was supposed to be very, it was inspired by August Sander, who's, I don't know if many of you are familiar with August Sander. He's a German photographer who took a lot of photographs, his whole life was really one project, a series of portraits of German society between is that still on? Can you just hear me without this? I'm not sure this is working. Hello? So August Sander was taking photographs of German society between the 1920s and 30s. And they're very, he was part of a movement in photography and art generally, which was called New Objectivity, which was saying, well, art is like science, actually. And the artist is an observer, is a witness to what's happening in the world. And the artist needs to withdraw their subjectivity as much as possible, to present facts about the world. And so his photographs are very factual. The pictures are all, the person is always in the middle of the frame. They're always full body, they're always looking straight at the camera. The way the photograph is titled is always the same. It's an attempt to say, this person and this person may be different, but they're also part of a system, and they're part of a community, and they're part of a broader system of society. And that was really like the DNA of the project at the beginning. But very quickly, that started to feel just wrong. Like this person doesn't just fit into the box of August Sander was trying to say that this is a bricklayer, or this is this person is a banker, or this is the artist, or this is the wife of an artist. So all the pictures had this kind of subtext of everyone was put in a category, and that's the story of photography. Photography began as a tool for characterizing places and people. You know, it was a kind of colonial weapon that was used for mapping terrain. And I mean, if you look at early colonial photographs of Palestine, for example, they're empty of people. They're just these kind of empty landscapes. There are no Palestinians. And that was very politically charged because it suggested that this was an empty place that could be the home for the Jews, perhaps, let's say. Oh, that's a good idea. Nobody lives there. So we'll send the Jews there. So, you know, photography was this very manipulative way of being objective and subjective at the same time. And that's always been what, as a photographer, what I've always struggled with about photography, is the experience of making many of these portraits was such a human experience. They were very rich exchanges with individuals, lots of conversations, lots of vulnerability. But then at the end of the process, you have this object, this piece of evidence that is actually highly manipulated, very easy to decontextualize. And when you then put a photograph in a frame, on a wall with a machine, and a sucker that's sucking on the face of this person, and suddenly the whole conversation that took place during the process of making the picture, it just feels like it's been miles, a million years ago, and it's gone on this journey. And if it was a painting, that wouldn't be a problem, because paintings are allowed to go on journeys. But when a photograph goes on a journey, we complain. We say, but that's not what you said you were going to do. You know, well, I never said I wanted to be in this thing in that way. And so you have this the complexity of consent. I mean, I don't know if you need a consent form for a painting, but you do with the photograph. But then, you know, and I believe in that, and I believe that people should obviously be part of the conversation. What happens to their photographs? But as a photographer, it's actually really tricky, because you go to someone and you say, can I take a picture? You go, what is it? I go, oh, it's this, and this, at least that's what I think it is. That sounds okay. Yes. Take a picture. Then, dinner with Euripides in the Chinese restaurant. Then, you know, this exhibition, that exhibition, robots, and the thing evolves. And eventually, the thing that was promised actually becomes a lie. And so then you go, well, what is consent actually? What has the person consented to? They've consented to what I thought was going on at the time. So it's not like I tried to lie about. So you can see, I don't have the answers to this, but there is so much complexity about this world of consent and real world and photography, and it's become so fraught that not only am I feeling a lot of vulnerability in relation to the technology of this show, but also the technology of the way photographs are disseminated in the world, and the politics of engagement between the photographer and the subject has become so fraught and so difficult that I don't know if I can do it anymore. And that's how I think.
It's interesting that you spoke about the colonial aspects, because photography is very uniquely situated as historical, within a series of historical acts of resistance. So it almost feels like photography became a lot more politically responsible a lot earlier than other forms, because it was instrumentalized, because it was used to discriminate and take advantage of others. And recently, you know, through the algorithm and social media, portraiture itself has changed. I think now my mind died. Oh, it's coming back. So yeah, so portraiture itself has changed, because, you know, remember what was happening like 5 years ago with the selfies. It was like a stamp, you know, same poses, different places in the world, same poses, over and over again. People were hiding behind the pose because they were feeling the pressure of the dissemination. They were feeling the pressure of the global audience. You know, the pouting and the frowning and the phone hiding the face. These were all acts of disguise. But now, what happens in your project is that I think there's another act of resistance coming out. The people actually had enough of that hiding, you know, and that's why they use in so many instances, your images, they've used it to make a stand. This is who I truly am. You know, all the quirky hobbies, all the, the identities, all those interesting things that they think they proudly define these individuals. I think it's a response to all the hiding that has been taking place recently in social media. You know.
And what's so nice about the show in its current form downstairs is that you see that more now, without the machines. So there's something I really enjoyed going to the space down there and looking at the photographs and actually not being controlled by this machine. And maybe that's actually that sense of relief of just, okay, I'm just going to look at this thing. I don't want to be manipulated. I think we all feel that all the time. Like my phone broke last week. I didn't have a phone for 5 days. My wife went absolutely crazy, but I loved it, you know.
It's blame you.
I think this technology is ruining our lives.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. This is what makes photography or images so interesting. And you know, that relationship, that fine distinction between fact and truth, you know, that colonial thing, this is a land, looks empty, doesn't mean that it's empty, you know. And so how something factual becomes somebody's truth, which is heavily influenced by conviction, bias, and I'm really this type of way I want to be. But I think images, not just photographic acts, but images themselves are there to kind of train us, you know, not to believe in everything, you know, to find the courage to represent ourselves as we want to be, you know, to find the courage to represent ourselves and be who we want to be in front of others who we've never met before, you know, and trust. Because at the end of the day, you put an image up, you know, on your feed, essentially you still have control. You can delete it if you want it. But to trust someone, you know, with a real camera, and to make work that will tour the world, right? Because it's one thing to show a British archive, or an archive of British individuals in Britain, and another to take that to Switzerland. You know? And then the audience itself, and place it in the church. You know, suddenly all these recontextualizations.
You know, on this journey we encountered one archive. He's speaking about archives, and I guess that we've created an archive here that will, we read it in one way at the moment. It's like our present, but in the future we'll look at it and we'll go, oh, that's definitely back then, or, you know, your photographs immediately become a record of a moment, and like the artistic quality to them can reduce. They may not even be artistically interesting, but they're always going to be a record of a moment and a bit of evidence and part of an archive. So yeah, I think we have made an archive, but we had this experience in Derby, I remember, when we went to this old photography studio, and I think it was like one of the oldest, actually this photograph, these two photographs were taken in that place. And it was this old photography studio that they originally did these glass negatives, portraits, and there was a commercial gallery, it was a commercial studio where you went in, if you were wealthy, you would go and have your portrait taken, or you would go with your family and get your portrait taken. And they had at the top of the building, they had these skylights that they lighted, and they used the light to fix the negatives. So they'd expose the picture, and then they would fix them on the top of the floor. And when we went there, the curators who had been working there for years and years, they said, "Do you want to see something amazing?" And we were like, "Well, yeah, that's basically what we do for a living." Yeah. So they were like, "Okay, cool." They took us to the basement, and in the basement, they said, "We recently were rebuilding the foundations of this building, and we found a hole in the ground full of glass negatives." And she picked up some of these negatives. We went down there, it was like a cave, and we pulled out, and there was this broken piece of glass with a face that had been shattered in half. And it turned out that what they did was, at the top of the building, they did the fixing, and if the pictures were bad, they would put them in a chute, and it would go, down into a hole in the basement and be left there forever. So what was in there was this amazing archive of a moment, but fragmented. And when you saw these images that had been shattered by this act of breaking them, they turned into different images. The image was not just the image, but it was then also the process of being broken. And it was just something so beautiful, and it was an archive that had become another archive in a way.
This kind of ties in with how the name of the project came about, with the perfect sentence.
Yeah.
Coming up, trying out different versions. I think it was based on a novel, wasn't it?
It's based on a novel called Angel. What was it?
The Devil in
The
Devil in America.
Devil in America. It was a quote from a book I was reading at the time. But we brainstormed. Actually, on the train I looked at the list that we came up with, and there was a lot of different titles. The titles are important.
Yeah, very important. That has a certain cruelty in it. So in order to come up with the one that you like, the one image, the one title, all the different variations, essentially perfection ties in with poetics of exclusion. It's almost like you have to voluntarily make something forgotten. You have to leave it aside. And that does remain with us, but not to the broader audience. And that brings me back to the significance of the fact that the final prints are not final prints in a technical sense.
Right, yeah. Actually, we should maybe explain that, because some people may not understand that in the images there are these marks. I think you've noticed. Well, that's a video. All of the pictures were shot on film, and I printed them in a darkroom. And when you go into a colour dark, I don't know if any of you do colour printing, but you have to do it in dark. It's unlike, black and white photography where you have a red light in the dark room. You can see roughly what you're doing. In a colour dark room, it's just black, which is kind of amazing. And the process of making this project was, me and Antonia, and sometimes Chris as well, we would go on a journey. We would take all these pictures, but then in London I'd go into the retreat, into the dark room, and I'd be in there for months, printing and printing and printing. And the thing is, I'm not really a very good printer, actually. And when I used to do commercial photography for advertising back in the day, and we always got like these professional printers to do all printing. And they could do perfect. Talk about perfection. They could do a perfect print. And with colour printing, you basically have cyan, magenta, yellow, and you adjust those three things and you get all the other colours. And I just was failing my prints were just looking terrible. The skin tones were too green, or too red, or too orange. And people looked unwell in the pictures, and I really struggled. I would make these test prints where you see the lines, where I figure out what the correct exposure was. And then I would adjust the filtration to get the colours right. And I did this for months and months, and eventually I was like, and maybe this is like putting my hands up, I was like, I can't get these things looking right. So I said the other option was to just actually embrace their wrongness. And I decided at that point that there was something quite nice about the pictures being very imperfect. That actually, in the context of them being manipulated by a machine, that the machine was supposed to be perfect, and the world was supposed to be imperfect. And so, and I wanted the pictures to feel as human as they possibly could. That they were objects that were built, they were framed by this physical frame that I made, and they were printed by me, and they were printed badly because I'm a bad printer and I'm a human being that's not good at everything. And I wanted the objects to feel bad, or not bad, but human. And this is why it's so upsetting that the machine is broken, because I wanted the machine to be perfect. And I wanted the contrast between the perfect machine and the imperfect human. That's what I wanted the show to feel like. And that's the bit that hurts.
But But it did that, I mean, for months and months, you know, so I wasn't yet, I mean, I'm trying to convince you for a while, I'm not to worry too much about that. Because it did work. I mean,
yes, it did.
It was, and it was an extraordinary experience because of those contrasts. You know, almost like perfectly calculated movement.
Yeah.
You know, and perfectly calculated placement, and that kind of hidden logic behind which image is going to take off and which image is going to place back. And those images were perfectly framed. And you know, I know what you mean. I know. I mean, I'm smiling because nobody that prints in the darkroom walks away thinking, yeah, I'm the best printer. But it feels like that. But you know, for what it's worth, when you're looking at the prints downstairs now, they're consistent.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
and that's what matters.
Well, I think making work, at least for me, is a lot about decision making, and you know, you double down on your decisions.
And actually, it kind of shows that what really matters is the image itself. You know, if the image is interesting, you can get away with a lot. And often we tend to forget that, and we tend to focus on the secondary aspects of the printing and everything else around the actual act of photographing, the act of the making of the image. I know.
Comes and goes.
Maybe it doesn't like what I'm saying. Oh, yeah, there you go, just prove my point.
It's interesting because so much of the time with the work I've made over the years, I've always reached this point where I've kind of got it all buttoned down. Like I've got my shtick, I know what I'm going to say, I know what it is, this is what it is, move on. But with this project, and maybe just because of its scale and its ambition, it's been very hard to do that. And that feels hard. And I guess, it's just making art is a very exposing thing, because you kind of experimenting in public.
And it comes with great expectations,
Yeah.
you know, of artists. Everything from the mode of conduct, everything from
and our world of experiences, there is a lot of perfection around us. You know, like you spoke about social media and kind of people put forward their best side. You see their perfect holidays, their perfect families, their perfect, you know, we're kind of obsessed with perfection. And that's not what this is.
But that's what makes it a very interesting title. That's what makes it more about the pursuit of perfection.
The pursuit, exactly.
Like the novel. I haven't read it, Antonia. Spoke to me about this, and I pretend like I've read it now.
Thank you for insightful and informative talk.